So, good evening, everyone, and warm welcome to our uh, honored guest, Mr. Richard Chambers. I request you to welcome him with a loud applause, and also to Mrs. Chambers here, Mr. Sunil Gaitonde, our chairman of the Accounting and Auditing Committee, Mr. Himanshu Krishnarwala, Vice President Narayan Pasari, my other colleagues, and dear friends from the IIA. Welcome. And before I give my opening remarks, first I'd like to say a few words in the sense that this initiative, which has been taken by both the associations, this is just the starting point. We'll be having many more joint programs as the days come. We'll having many more long duration programs, and maybe some residential courses also. Uh, to formalize our association, we have decided to enter into a memorandum of understanding, and this understanding, which has been now in black and white, is just to give kind of a initiative, nothing more. It is just spelling out what I am saying right now. It is just for keeping many more programs jointly, organizing many more programs jointly, maybe some few publications in times to come. It's just formalizing that, and we wanted to sign this, sir, in your presence, since you are going to be in India, and we take this opportunity to sign. Sunil bhai, can you please sign this first?
Okay, my pleasure.
So, good evening, everyone, once again. Uh, Today is an historic day. We have the two great institutions coming on a common platform for a common goal and a purpose of dissemination and promoting knowledge of internal audit to its members. Yes, it is an historic day when we have the office bearers and distinguished guests from the IIA visiting the BCAs. Yes, it is indeed an historic day when we have the President and the CEO of the Institute of Internal Auditors, Mr. Richard Chambers, present in person and agreeing to address us. Henry Ford once said, "Coming together is a beginning, keeping together is progress, and working together is success." This event is a testimony to these words. This event is significant in many ways. This is the first time that BCA has signed an agreement with another association for conducting joint activities and programs on an ongoing basis. Maybe the same is true for the IIA. This event, which is viewed live, will give a major boost to the internal audit as an important function and practice area for the chartered accountants, and in understanding the various nuances of criticality and conduct of the internal audit. This collaboration will lead to developing mutual beneficial programs, projects, and activities for its members in the field of internal audit, as well as to offer members of one association an opportunity to attend programs by the other association. Many people associate the genesis of modern internal audit with the establishment of the IIA. When I visited the website of the IIA, I was very impressed with their mission statement, which reads as follows: to provide dynamic leadership for the global profession of internal auditing. And to achieve the same, the mission includes advocating and promoting value addition by internal audit professionals to their organizations, providing professional educational and development opportunities, researching, dissemination, and promoting knowledge of internal auditing amongst practitioners and stakeholders, and providing a common platform for internal auditors worldwide to share information and experiences. We at BCAS can easily relate to this mission due to the various similarities it has with its own mission statement. Though IIA India are doing its bit in creating awareness and also in professionalizing the internal audit function, the basic understanding of internal audit and its utility is lacking in many organizations, especially the SMEs. It will be appreciated that the business environment is highly dynamic. Factors such as competition, new technologies, changes in laws and regulations are creating new opportunities and simultaneously bringing new risks for the organizations. It is important for the organization to keep enough checks and balances for proper governance. In such dynamic environment, the functions of internal audit is playing a key role. At the same time, it is important for the internal auditors to ensure that their competencies and knowledge are up to date so that they are able to render the services to the satisfaction of the stakeholders. Chartered accountants play a pivotal role through internal audits. As internal auditors, their understanding of the organization's key business processes provides the opportunities for continuous improvement. As the scope of the internal audit has broadened, internal audit departments have been taking a number of steps to boost their performance. A major focus area is to leverage new technologies to cover more areas through data analytics. In other words, it's about being able to digest a huge amount of information and making sense of what is an efficient manner. The importance of the function of internal audit at times is not appreciated by the SMEs as well as the many of the upcoming larger corporates. This may be due to their ignorance of the criticality of inputs provided by internal auditors through their findings on operation and business risk, and enabling implementation of risk mitigation strategies, corporate governance initiatives, and setting up of controls for efficient business opportunities. I am confident that this coming together of two prominent associations will open the floodgates for learning and exchange of ideas for professionals to excel in the field of internal audit. I once again welcome Mr. Chambers, and we are eager to hear your thoughts, sir, on the global trends and outlook in internal audit. May I request Preeti Cherian to formally introduce Mr. Chambers. Thank you very much.
Good evening, all. While Mr. Chambers doesn't need any introduction, I've been given the privilege and honor to do so. Mr. Chambers is the President and the Chief Executive Officer of the Institute of Internal Auditors, the global professional association and standard-setting body for internal auditors. The IIA serves more than 185,000 members spread over 170 countries and territories, and is the internal audit profession's most widely recognized advocate, educator, and provider of standards, guidance, and certifications. During more than 7 years as global CEO, Mr. Chambers has led the IIA to record membership and the launch of a number of valuable initiatives to benefit members and the profession. He has authored the award-winning book, Lessons Learned on the Audit Trail, which is available in 5 languages. Accounting Today named him one of the top 100 most influential people in accounting in 2012 right through 2015. Mr. Chambers serves concurrently on the Committee of Sponsoring Organizations of the Treadway Commission, Board of Directors, the International Integrated Reporting Council, IIRC, and the Institute of Internal Auditors Board of Directors. Thank you, Mr. Chambers, and the floor is all yours.
Well, thank you very much. It's indeed an honor to be here. Let's see, my presentation will be here. Okay, let's let them set this up momentarily here. I think this will be all right. Be able to use this. There we go. Okay. All right. Well, thank you for the kind introduction, and it is truly an honor and a privilege for me to be with you this evening. This is a unique opportunity for me to be able to address a group as prestigious as the Bombay Chartered Accountants Society, and I know that this newfound relationship that you're forging with the IIA chapter here in Bombay is one that will be fruitful and will serve the professions of internal auditors and accountants jointly, and I am confident that we'll look back on this day in the future as a real milestone for the professional community in the Bombay region. I have been in my role now slightly over 8 years. I suppose that we didn't get quite as updated of a resume or a bio as we could have. I've just passed 8 years in the CEO role last month, or earlier this month actually. It was early January of this month. And the world has changed a great deal in those 8 years. In fact, it was interesting. I have a blog coming out later this evening here in the morning in the U.S. Where I contrast the conditions 8 years ago with those that we find this week, because this week will mark the 8th anniversary of a blog that I have been authoring typically weekly over those years. And I was drawing a number of contrasts as I looked around at the world in which we live today and the one 8 years ago when I started the blog that I've been authoring. It was interesting because there were many parallels, but there also are significant differences. One of the parallels that I was observing is that 8 years ago this week, when I first authored my blog, we had just inaugurated a new president in the United States, Barack Obama. And there was a lot of anxiety on the part of his opponents and a lot of hope and enthusiasm on the part of his supporters. 8 years later, we see each sitting in opposite seats now as we have a new president, and those who are his supporters are very optimistic, and those who've been opponents are very anxious. But these things have a way of sorting themselves out over time, and so I would just say to those of you who might be wondering, what do I think about all of this, this current economic or current political climate in the United States, I have observed on a number of occasions recently that every political change brings with it risks and opportunities. And as internal auditors and as professionals, we certainly understand that our role is to help assess what those risks are, make sure that our organizations have identified those risks and are monitoring them and implementing whatever controls or actions they can to mitigate them. At the same time, as is well known, the Chinese have a word that is essentially the same for risk and opportunity. The opportunities that are presented in a new world and a new political order should also not be overlooked. So I would simply say that things are never as dark as they appear. but they're also never as bright as they appear. So to those who, in my country, who are supporting all this political change, I just would offer a word of caution to beware. And to those who are very anxious, I offer a word of caution to not despair. And so with that, I will move on and address you this evening on some of the global trends and outlooks impacting our profession. I'll take just a couple of minutes at the outset to make sure that you're familiar with the IIA and some of the pretty remarkable things that we can share about the footprint that we have globally. Then I want to talk to you very briefly about some of the key trends that we're seeing in the profession as 2017 dawns. And then the bulk of my presentation will focus on will focus on the future, and we'll be talking about what Internal Audit's customers are telling us on a global basis, and some strategies for success, including the importance of striving for agility, transforming the talent that we have in our organizations, really taking a hard look at our processes as internal auditors, and then advocating for our values. So let me get started and talk to you a little bit about what's going on. As you heard in the introductory remarks, the IIA has quite a large presence globally. The statistics that we are officially sharing are that we have about 185,000 members in 170 countries, and we have more than 100, almost 110 now, international affiliates, including, of course, IA India. I would say officially because unofficially we have now, in the last few months, moved beyond 190,000 members. In fact, my most recent review of statistics at the end of December showed that we had more than 193,000 members. And I'm cautiously optimistic that within the next few months, and certainly no later than the end of next year, we will be I would be able to stand in front of you and talk about a global membership of more than 200,000. Now, that didn't come without a lot of effort, a lot of pain, a lot of investment by hundreds, if not thousands of men and women over the course of the 75-year history of our organization. I also note that we've had a presence in India now for 50-odd years, and that also has borne significant fruit as the IIA is seen across this country as a voice for the internal audit profession. So this is a time of celebration for us at the IIA. We've just concluded our 75th anniversary celebration. We were initially founded in 1941, and last year was a year of reflection, but also a year of hope and anticipation about what the next 75 years will bring to our organization. If I take a closer look at our membership by region, and I recognize that the slide here has some relatively small print, so permit me to just highlight for you what the breakout is by IA, by region. The largest region, of course, by membership is North America, where we have more than 73,000 members. In South America, we have slightly more than 14,000 members. Europe, the second largest region, we have a little more than 48,000 members. And in the Middle East and Africa, we have, in the Middle East, we have a little more than 8,000 members. And this is our most rapidly growing region. We've added more than 20% of our membership there just in the last 1 year alone. In Africa, we have slightly more than almost 15,000 members, I should say. And then, of course, the region that we're sitting in this evening, the Asia Pacific region, we have slightly more than 32,000 members, and we've also seen more than a 6% growth in this region over the last year. So it is a profession that is growing, and I'm going to share some statistics to that effect in a few minutes. But it does help sometimes to see just exactly how we're distributed. There's really no region in the world where we don't have a significant group of members, and we're very enthusiastic about the growth in some of our key regions, particularly in Africa, the Middle East, and in the Asia Pacific region. I would also note that our certifications have been growing at an almost breathtaking rate. We currently have certified more than 140,000 professionals across the world with the certified internal auditor. Now that's since we first launched the CIA, the Certified Internal Auditor, in the late 1970s. I had the privilege as the president and CEO of presiding over the awarding of the 100,000th certificate in 2011. And if you'll note, we currently have more than 142,000 CIAs, which means we're growing at a rate of almost 40% every 5 years. That's pretty amazing for a certification that has been in place as long as the CIA. If I'm fortunate, I will have the opportunity to preside over the awarding of the 150,000th CIA certification, and that could happen again as early as next year, based on the rate at which this certification is being adopted worldwide. We also have a certification in risk management assurance, the CRMA. We launched that in 2012, and you can see that already we have almost 15,000 CRMAs worldwide. The CCSA, the CFSA, the CGAP, and the QIAL, the other specialty certifications, are also widely adopted. One of the things that I am often proud of is looking at the certifications, how widely adopted they are outside of where we originated them in North America. And one of the statistics that I shared with some officials from the government in India here last year that quickly caused them to take note and to take notes was when I mentioned to them that half of all of the parts of the CIA taken in the world, or half of all the exam parts written in the world in 2014, the last year we had statistics, were written in China. So this is a certification that is being rapidly adopted in all regions of the world, particularly in the Asian region. And I would just encourage all of you to continue to take note of this and to look at ways that we can promote it. It may ultimately be that we're able to offer some sort of a challenge exam here in India for those who hold professional accounting qualifications. It's something that we continue to explore. We have offered this challenge exam in recent years, in fact last year, with the ACCA body, and we have begun negotiations or discussions with IFAC on the possibility of being able to offer the challenge exam, that is an abbreviated version of the CIA exam for IFAC members. So still early to say when and how that might happen here in India, but it would be my hope that that is something we can do at some point in the future. But I would urge you not to wait, take advantage of the opportunity to sit for the CIA, study for it, and to demonstrate your acumen in internal audit by holding the globally recognized certification for internal audit, the CIA. So enough about the IIA. Let me turn my attention now to this profession, the internal audit profession. And as 2017 dawns, we have some very fresh information on what's happening with this profession globally, and I'd like to just take a few minutes and review that with you before we talk a little bit about the future. I think it is always best to know where one stands before you start to talk about where one will go from here. So let's talk a little bit about where we are today as we conclude 2017, and we have some very fresh statistics from our Pulse of Internal Audit survey that was completed late in 2016. We collected the data that will represent these statistics that I'm going to show you for the next few minutes from a global survey. More than 2,250 respondents from 111 countries and territories. 17% of those respondents, appropriately enough, were from the Asia-Pacific region. And this report is available for download for any of those of you here or who might be watching this via video. It is available for download from the IIA.org website. and we would encourage you to take advantage of that. And you can read further about what I'm going to update you on over the next few minutes. One of the ways that I have, over the years, monitored how this profession is evolving is to look at some key trending data. One of the trends that I look at is where does internal audit's reporting relationships align within the organizations that it serves. Certainly, it's our view that internal audit should have a reporting relationship to the very highest levels of an organization. And as we look at the 2016, the late 2016 survey data, we see that almost half of internal audit departments report administratively to the CEO or equivalent in their organization. A substantial percentage also report to the CFO. And while we don't see that as the optimum reporting relationship, we do believe that there has been a trend, an upward migration over the last 10 to 15 years of internal audit reporting administratively to higher and higher levels within the organization. There's still a bit of a trend in North America for internal audit to report on a frequent basis to the CFO, and I think that's tending to skew the global results somewhat, because as I look at other regions of the world, it is much more likely that internal audit will report to the CEO rather than the CFO. Now, I was asked this morning when I was speaking about this topic what my thoughts are about internal audit reporting to the CFO, and my views have been made very clear through a series of speeches and blogs that I have written, that I personally believe that it is time for internal audit to report no lower than the CEO. Reporting to the CFO at least indicates an appearance of a lack of objectivity on the part of internal auditors, because it is very difficult, after all, to audit your boss. And so much of internal audit's work still is in the review of financial reporting controls, not a majority, but still enough of it is looking at financial reporting controls and other financial risks, that having internal audit report to the CFO would clearly make an outsider believe that the internal auditors cannot be objective and that the internal audit function itself cannot be independent. I believe there's a growing trend to this view on a global basis. We see, particularly within the financial services sector, that the regulators are looking increasingly with frowns upon internal audit reporting to the CFO. I would tell you, for example, in the United States, that the Federal Reserve now has said that any internal audit department within the banks in the United States, at least the large banks, anytime the internal audit department reports administratively to the CFO, the audit committee must explain in writing why, because it is seen that the independence of the internal audit function would not be presumed to be there if it is reporting any less than the CEO. Now, moving from administrative reporting to a functional reporting relationship, the news is much better. Almost three-quarters, 73% of those who completed our survey indicate that they report functionally to the audit committee of the board or to the board itself. Again, very encouraging news. I would tell you that when I first surveyed around this particular question in 2002, when I was at the IA during an earlier tenure, I found that only about 50% of internal audit functions were reporting functionally to the audit committee. So we've seen a dramatic rise over the last decade or decade and a half, and that has been driven largely by the emphasis being placed on internal audit by regulators and others, and the expectation that internal audit will have a reporting relationship, and the emphasis on the audit committee's role to oversee internal audit. And I think all of that has caused the incidence of that reporting relationship to rise. When we look at resources, it's also a good indicator. I often think that internal audit's resources are a good reflection of the extent to which it has won the support of its key stakeholders. And so as I look at what internal auditors tell us their resources are going to look like in 2017. I note that 35% indicated that they expected their budgets to increase this year. That's a sizable percentage, but it's been a trend that we've noted over the last few years, that there is a year over year likelihood of increasing internal audit resources. In fact, the last time we saw the incidence of internal audit resources declining more than they're increasing was in 2009 in the immediate post-aftermath of the global financial crisis. Since then, I don't think there's been a single year that we have surveyed where less than 30% of internal audit departments who responded said that they would expect their budgets to increase. By contrast, a mere 9% thought that they may see a decrease in their budgets this year. Again, that's not scientifically empirical evidence in and of itself that internal audit stakeholders are happy, but you generally don't spend more money on a product that you're not getting a lot of value out of. And I think that is that's the real lesson for me in evaluating those statistics. As we look further, we ask how many of those internal audit departments expected to increase their staffing in 2017, and more than a fourth, more than 26%, indicated they expected staffing to increase this year, and a mere 6% actually expected any decline in their staffing levels. So good news, I think, on that front. We also asked some questions about where internal audit was dedicating its resources and where did it expect to focus additional resources in the year ahead. 43% of those who responded said that they expected to increase their coverage in risk management assurance. Now, that's an interesting statistic because just a few days ago, I think it was week before last, KPMG issued their annual survey of audit committee members. And they asked audit committee members what areas they would like to see internal audit dedicate more coverage to in the year ahead. And the number one answer for audit committee members was risk management assurance. So audit committee members have indicated to KPMG that they expect to see internal audit or would like to see internal audit dedicating more resources on risk management assurance. And chief audit executives say that is the number one area they expect to increase coverage in. And that's the kind of alignment that I always like to see, because if we are focusing on the areas that are of most significance to our stakeholders or our customers, then we're likely to be successful in meeting those expectations. 42% also said they expect us to dedicate or would like to see us dedicate, 42% of chief audit executives also expected that they would increase coverage in business and strategic risks, and 31% expected that they would dedicate additional coverage in corporate governance, governance-related areas. And again, keeping in mind, that doesn't mean that we go in and tell the board we're here to audit you. It simply means that we have a dialogue with the board and with the committees of the board about how we can help them assess their own effectiveness. There is still a lot of work to be done by internal audit in being able to identify what role it would play in auditing the effectiveness of governance, and I'm certainly not advocating a reckless approach by internal auditors to charge headlong into auditing the effectiveness of their boards, because boards get a little nervous if the internal auditors who work for them are knocking at the door telling them they're there to help. As we look further, there are some areas that are what I would call emerging trends, where internal audit has indicated, or where the survey respondents indicated that they are going to dedicate some additional coverage, and one of them is culture. You don't have to be an avid follower of corporate news to know that over the past couple of years there have been some very high-profile failures on the part of major companies around the world, and in each case you can start to dig deeper, and you find that culture was perhaps the culprit. I've spoken on this topic of culture, when culture is the culprit. in several instances. We've seen these are not limited to any particular geographic region. We've seen them in Japan with the Toshiba accounting scandal. Year before last, we saw it with Volkswagen's Dieselgate scandal last year. Year before last, I guess. We've seen it with the World Football League, FIFA's fraud, corruption scandal. We've seen it with American company, the rental car company Hertz. In these cases where we have seen scandals that have plagued brand names, companies or organizations that enjoyed extraordinary reputation, where we've seen these scandals that have hit them, whether it's financial reporting or compliance scandals, one doesn't have to look very far to begin to question whether culture was in fact at a root cause in the debacles. I would say regardless of the conclusions one draws, and everyone is entitled to draw their own conclusions, culture has clearly plagued a number of organizations in the last couple of years. And we're increasingly seeing financial regulators looking to internal audit to assess culture within the organizations that they are responsible for auditing. So culture is clearly on the minds of internal auditors and our key stakeholders and regulators around the world. When we surveyed around this, 86% of those who answered our survey agreed that internal audit understands the risks associated with culture. We know that culture is a risk in the organizations we serve, but only 53% indicated that their internal audit departments know how to audit culture, and only 28% say that they are actually auditing culture. So we know we have some work to do here. I've given lectures on this topic of auditing culture. I don't believe that we need to plunge directly into doing corporate or enterprise-wide audits of culture. I think you need to develop some acumen, some expertise before you do that. And I think you start by looking at culture in the course of every audit. Every finding in an audit has a root cause. There is at the end of the day, there is a reason why conformance or compliance doesn't occur. There's a reason why efficiency or effectiveness is not attained, and quite often it tends to be cultural. The second of the emerging risks that I think most of us have probably front of mind if we're in this business has to do with cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is probably the most pervasive risk out there. Almost any organization that is connected in any way, shape, or form to the web, to the internet, has cybersecurity risks. I often note that there are two types of organizations: those that have been hacked and know it, and those who have been hacked and don't know it. There are very few who could ever be completely cleared of having had any cybersecurity breach at all. So 93% of internal auditors who responded say that they understand the risk associated with cybersecurity, yet only 61% said they know how to audit it. What's even more troubling is that 25% said they've done no work in cybersecurity at all. So this is still an area that we think there's more work to be done, and it's an area that we're focusing on providing more guidance and training out of the IIA. The third of the areas that we explored in this latest Pulse survey has to do with big data. 92% agree that their internal audit departments understand the risk associated with big data in their organizations, yet only 71% say that they know how to do any audit work related to big data, and 26% say they've done no work in this area at all. And obviously there are risks associated with how big data is used, how it's managed, how it's stored, and there is still plenty of work for internal audit to do related to that important emerging trend. As I said, if you take a look at the full white paper on these topics, it'll give you a lot more information on what is happening and how internal audit can step up its game in terms of addressing some of these emerging risks. So with that, I'll sort of transition from talking about the present to talking about the future. Now, let me say at the outset that I am not a big believer in predicting the future because as an internal audit observer for many years, in fact, I've been in this profession more than 4 decades, I would tell you that as what some might refer to as a thought leader, I have been surprised more often than I have been satisfied that I can predict the future. Rarely do we see major turns or twists coming. In fact, I would tell you that 3 months ago, most of us didn't think we'd be talking about any risks associated with the political change because we didn't see it coming. A year ago, no one really thought that there was a risk related to Brexit because most people didn't think it was coming. And I would tell you that 15 years ago, most of us hadn't really anticipated the debacles that we saw in WorldCom and Enron and other companies around the world that caused a seismic shift in where internal audit's coverage was for much of the decades of the 2000s. Who among us saw the financial crisis coming as severely as it did prior to the time that it actually arrived in 2008? So I say all of these things merely to caution that it is very difficult to predict where internal audit is going to be focused, what risks we're going to be looking at or talking about, because those are often outside of our control. I want instead to spend some time here talking with you about how we should be prepared to address the future, not what we will audit. So let's start by taking a look at one of the things that I think we need to focus on if we want to truly be successful in navigating the future, and that is listening to our customers, the stakeholders that internal audit supports. And we have some very recent data, unprecedented data, to help us understand what internal audit's customers are looking for in 2016, 17. As we stand here today, we have a good idea what internal audit's customers are looking for. We did a global survey led by the Internal Audit Foundation, the arm of the IIA that does research, and the global firm Protiviti. It surveyed on a global basis, unprecedented really for our profession. More than 1,100 respondents participated. They conducted in-person interviews with more than 100 stakeholders of internal audit around the world in 23 languages and 23 countries and 13 languages. If you look at the profile of the respondents, the participants, you see that about a third were board members, a third were made up of CEOs, CFOs, and a third were others in the C-suite. So it gives us a pretty good indication of what these stakeholders are thinking. Now, differing from other surveys that I've seen of internal audit stakeholders, this wasn't designed to say what does stakeholders think internal audit is doing wrong. Rather, it said, here are the expectations we have of internal audit. Now, we'll go through these relatively quickly because I want to be able to cover all of the topics around the future. But one thing that they made very clear is that they believe that internal audit needs to know its organization, mission, strategies, and risks. This is longhand for the simple phrase, know your business. We are expected to know the business of our organizations. There was a time when internal auditors were referred to as the bean counters, along with the accounting profession, I might add. Many people just sort of said, oh yeah, they're the bean counters. Well, I would tell you that the internal audit profession has evolved beyond the age of bean counting, and today we must know not only how to count the beans, but how they're grown, how they're harvested, how they're marketed, and how the profit margin is determined. Because if we truly are going to be effective in our roles, we have to know much more than how many there are. And so I would say know the business is a very important strategy for every internal auditor. I have a new book coming out actually later this week. The title of the book is Trusted Advisors, and it's about the key attributes of the outstanding men and women in internal audit. Did some research, spent some time gathering perspectives of chief audit executives around the world, and one of the things that they made very clear to me in the course of this research was that the real outstanding internal auditors, the ones who are ultimately the trusted advisors in their organizations, learn the business and know it inside out, because you can't be an advisor if you don't know how to give advice. So that was the first message from stakeholders. The second is that assurance work still comes first in their mind. Now, I know that comes as a bit of disappointment to some in our profession who've envisioned that we would become advisors first and foremost, that we would deliver advisory services above anything else, but our stakeholders still make it clear that they value assurance. They want us to provide assurance on the effectiveness of risk management, on the effectiveness of internal controls, on the effectiveness of compliance management risk, or compliant risk management. These are things that are very important, and they value them very much, particularly audit committees, and it is most valued when it is aligned with the risks of the organization. So the first part of that message is assurance is valued highly. The second is advisory work is also valued. It's also highly desired. After you've done your assurance work, the advice is very much valued and appreciated, but even then they want us to align with the risks of the organization. They don't need advice unless it's an area that presents significant risk to the organization. The next message from them was that they really like for us to build relationships with management and the board. And by that, they're saying they want us to feel comfortable enough to come to them and communicate with them whenever there's an issue that warrants their attention, and that we need to have the kind of back and forth relationship that isn't predicated on a lot of formality and structure. They want us to be there and be in that role to listen to them, identify key risks, and communicate with them as we need to. They tell us that they expect to see us conforming to the standards of internal audit. That's the International Professional Practices Framework. Now, I know that there are those in India who believe that maybe there should be some national internal audit standards. I don't necessarily have a problem seeing any country's accounting or auditing bodies developing supplemental guidance. But there is only one set of global standards by which internal audit practices around the world, and that's the International Professional Practices Framework of the Institute of Internal Auditors. And I would tell you that to the extent to which the stakeholders responded to us, they like to know that their internal auditors are following an authoritative set of standards in carrying out their work. They also said that when it comes to communications, they want to see internal audit communicate observations frequently, and that they don't want us to just rely on written communications. They want us to break out of our shell, out of our introverted nature, and be there open and transparent with the information that we have on the organization. They want to see us coordinating with the second line of defense, those internal monitoring functions within the organizations, because they want to make sure we're not duplicating what they're doing, and that the second line of defense is not duplicating what internal audit is doing. Perhaps more importantly, they want to make sure that there's not gaps, that neither the internal monitoring functions of the organization and internal audit are addressing. And then finally, they said that they expect to see internal audit structured properly within the organization. That is, they want to make sure that internal audit has the independence as a function to carry out its work. Now, for those of you who are not schooled in the nuance of some of the terminology in our guidance in the International Professional Practices Framework, we use independence when we're speaking about the internal audit department. We expect to see an internal audit department have a functional alignment within the organization that lets it carry out its work free of interference, which we describe as independence. When it comes to the individuals, the internal auditors in the internal audit department, we do not expect that they're going to be independent. They work for the organizations that pay them. They can't be fully independent, but they should be objective. They should bring an objective mindset to their work, and carry out their work free of bias, free of preconceived notions. So independence, organizational attribute, objectivity is a personal attribute. What are some key action items that internal auditors need to take away from what the stakeholders have told us? First, we believe that they need to become masters in knowing the mission, strategy, objectives, and risks of the organization. I have shared in my books and in my blogs over the years how whenever I would change roles in my career from one organization to another, I always felt that it was a very important priority to learn as much about the company or the organization as I could, because I didn't believe I could truly bring the value as a chief audit executive unless I knew the core processes of the organization, the risks, the missions, and the strategy. I couldn't do the things that I needed to do unless I made those a priority. I think that's true of anyone in any organization. We think that there needs to be an explicit consideration of both current and future risks when you're looking at assurance work. We have to look not only at the risks today, but what do we think the risks will be next week, next month, next year. And we think that we need to be able to take advantage of our unique role, or at least they think we need to take advantage of our unique role as experts in risk management in the organization to bring the right perspective around risks and the importance of managing risks and identifying and designing the controls appropriate to mitigate that risk. So those are some things that I think we can do to be successful in the future, and that has to do with listening to our customers. There are some other strategies, though, that I don't think we can overlook. As I look at the last 15 years in this profession, one of the things that I think has allowed us to continue to rise in terms of stature has been our agility. If we look at the internal audit profession in the late 1990s, it was a profession that was focusing on becoming consulting masters. Many of us believe that the days of looking behind us were gone. We needed to become consultants first and foremost. And you can look at a lot of literature from the late 1990s and the very beginning of this century, and you see that that's where internal auditors thought the future was. And then we ended up with that series of explosive and extraordinary financial scandals, Enron, WorldCom, Parmalat, others around the world that seemed to hit in a very short window. And that future changed completely. We moved from the idea that we were going to be consultants, being all-knowing, all-telling, to going back to the roots of our profession and focusing on financial controls, providing assurance on the effectiveness of financial controls. And that pretty much guided the profession from about 2002 to 2007 or 8. And then, of course, the global financial crisis hit, and we didn't really have a lot of time to go and look at financial reporting controls because our companies were struggling to keep their head above water, and it became very important for internal audit to be able to help identify cost savings and expense reduction and containment to help our organizations with the bottom line. And then over the course of the last 5 years, we have evolved to the place where we're looking at risk management assurance and corporate culture, cybersecurity, and all the new technology risks. So the one thing that has been constant about this century so far is that nothing has been constant. We have had to be very, very agile and adapt at the speed and audit at the speed of risk. This is a term that I coined in a blog about 2 years ago, and the idea is that risks are emerging now at the speed of light, at warp speed. And we have to be capable of adapting our coverage to address these emerging risks. Things like cybersecurity, business continuity, culture that we've already talked about, geopolitical instability. All of these technology risks, including cloud computing, mobile technology, social media, all of these things are risks that we weren't even talking about 7 or 8 years ago. But today, they comprise a healthy percentage of a typical internal audit plan. So we must be agile if we're going to be successful. The good news is that almost all internal auditors today do a risk assessment. 91% said that they do a risk assessment, and 85% use that risk assessment to develop an audit plan. Yet, there is some news that isn't so good. 63% say that they don't update the plan more than twice a year. So maybe they do a risk assessment, they develop an audit plan, and 6 months later they might update it. 15% say that they have highly flexible plans. 31% say they don't update the risk assessment at all, and only 21% say they do anything resembling a continuous risk assessment update. And I like to use the analogy that if I develop a risk-based audit plan on the basis of a risk assessment, and I don't update that for the next year, it is analogous to using a security camera that only takes a picture once a day. I have no idea the rest of the day if I'm safe or not from who's outside that door, because things change. And so we have to be capable of identifying risks as they emerge. There are a number of strategies for doing that, and we've spoken about and lectured on those, and I'm happy to point you to some blogs that I've written that would help you identify some tactics around continuous risk assessment. We also have to recognize in the future that talent will have to be transformed to match up with the risks that are emerging. Emerging risks demand different skills. I can't use the same talent that I would use to do financial reporting control reviews to do cybersecurity reviews. I don't know what tomorrow's risk will bring, but my guess is that I won't have the complement on the staff to be able to address them. We have to be capable of developing talent management strategies within the internal audit department, and there really are only a limited number of ways that you're going to be able to address any talent gaps. You can either develop it internally, that is, we can help our staff, those who comprise our internal audit department, we can help them to acquire the skills, to develop the skills they need to address some of these new risks. We can acquire the skills, meaning we can go out into the open market and recruit. But my experience has been whenever there's an emerging risk, everybody's trying to get the expertise at the same time. And all that ends up doing, if we run out and try to hire the cybersecurity experts to be permanent members of our staff, is that we compete with all of the other people in this room for the same staff. And all it does is frustrate us because we can't keep them. Somebody else hires them away and pays them more money. And then the last of the alternatives, and one that I think many of us here would agree is also a very, very effective strategy, is sourcing. That is, identifying those specialized risks that we don't have the capability for within the department, and bringing in third-party providers who have that expertise. And a good, healthy third-party co-sourcing relationship is one that I have said for a long time is a leading practice by any company seeking to maintain the edge in its internal audit effectiveness. We also need to remember that the skills that are being recruited today are very different from the ones that were recruited in the past. In fact, when we asked last year, what are the top 5 skills you're recruiting for, or what are the top skills you're recruiting for in your internal audit department, chief audit executives told us number 1 was analytical and critical thinking. Certainly not something I would have expected to see on the list 10 years ago or 15 years ago, but it has been consistently the number 1 skill for at least the last 5 years. Risk management assurance is number 2, forensics and investigations is number 3, IT 4, and communication skills 5. Anybody notice one that's missing there? Accounting. Accounting skills are not in the top 5 anymore. In fact, accounting skills come in consistently around 8th place. And this has been the case for the last 3 to 5 years. Now, were we to end up with another post-Enron WorldCom kind of scenario where financial reporting controls are seen as high risk, my guess is that accounting skills would move up that list very rapidly. But right now, it is not as high on the list. Now, that doesn't mean that everyone out there has said, well, we don't need accountants in the department anymore. It's saying that maybe that's something we expect people to have, but these are the skills that we're looking for on top of it. So I'm just suggesting to you that as accountants, and many of us in the room have an accounting background, myself included, we have to understand that that alone isn't going to assure us of a successful internal audit career, or won't assure us a competitive position when it comes to getting an internal audit job. We also need to recognize, to be successful going forward, that we have to revolutionize our processes. As I look at internal audits processes today, the core processes of this profession, they still haven't changed a lot in the 40 years I've been in it. Audits are still done with the same basic regimen. You go out and you gather pre-planning information. You assess the risk, then you write an audit program. You go out and collect data, you analyze it, you draw conclusions, you write a draft report, you socialize the results, and then you publish a report, and then you move to the next project. I would tell you that's exactly how we did it in 1975 when I first joined internal audit. And how many professions can we say that have not really evolved a lot in the way they do their work over the course of 4 decades? So it is something that I think all of us need to focus on. We need to recognize that if we can streamline our processes and make them more efficient, we will be more powerful in enhancing our capacity. These are what I call capacity multipliers. Streamlining your risk assessment methodology, streamlining your audit planning process, your audit field work, and your audit reporting processes. It is not uncommon for an internal audit department to take as long to publish a final audit report as it took to do the entire audit. There's not a lot of efficiency when it takes you as long to package your product as it does to create it. And so this is something that I think as internal auditors we have to work on. We are operating in an era where those we serve are used to being able to get information instantly. I can Google an answer in a few seconds, but it takes me a few months to get an audit report. And that's going to start to really damage us as a profession if we don't get more efficient in the way we do our work. We also need to be able to leverage technology. We need to be able to do much more with data mining and analytics. That's one of the most sought after skills right now in internal audit, is the ability to use those tools like ACL and IDEA and these other powerful tools that are out there. We also need to have the use, or make good use of, internal audit management systems like Teammate and others that help you to keep up with your workload, manage the entire audit process, document your work papers. These are powerful tools as well. And then finally, mobile tools and other tools that are being developed via technology. The last thing I think we need to be capable of doing if we want to be successful is elevating our image. Now you see a picture in front of you that was taken last year, June the 30th of 2016, when I had the privilege, along with many colleagues there, to ring the opening bell on the New York Stock Exchange. Now it's been estimated that tens of millions of people saw that event from around the world, because either live or replayed, the opening bell ringing on the stock exchange is played in business on business video sites or around the world. But you know, that's not the kind of advocacy that's going to make or break internal audit. It was a great opportunity, a great exposure for the IIA and for the profession. But the real valuable advocacy for our profession begins at home. It begins with you and with those who provide internal audit services. It requires internal auditors to develop well-crafted strategic plans for their department that have a focus to align with the company or organization's strategic plan in the future. It requires us to develop dynamic, risk-centric audit plans that enable us to audit at the speed of risk, to have quality assurance and improvement programs that ensure the quality of the work that we deliver, and to have a strategy for gaining continuous feedback and realigning our work depending on the feedback we get from our stakeholders. It is true that the IA advocates to legislators, regulators, standard setters, and others, but I can get out there all day long and give speeches to board members and meet with CEOs and CFOs and talk about how great internal audit is. But if they don't go back to their offices and see that their internal audit department is every bit as good as described, then we won't be successful as a profession. So all of us have got to work together to deliver the level of service and to promote internal audit within our organizations if we're to see the overall success and to be able to reap the fruit that a good, strong advocacy strategy will yield. So with that, I will conclude my remarks. I appreciate again your time this evening. I think they're going to now ask me a few questions. Hopefully I'll be able to answer those. But I thank you again, and I look forward to meeting you all either this evening or at another time. Thank you.
So you did scare us when you said accounting is not one of the critical areas, but though it is on the 8th in the list, you have raised quite a few pain areas yourself and quite a few issues yourself. But to ask you many more difficult questions and where we are more concerned as an answer, and the paradigm shift that we are seeing, let me invite Nandita Ben. Please, if you can join. So she will be taking these proceedings forward. Thank you.
So first of all, thank you so much for the remarkable presentation. I think it has set the agenda for Bombay Chartered Accountant and IIA for things that we need to work on together. And I do hope that in 2017, we can invite you to ring the opening bell of BSE or NSE, the Bombay Stock Exchange or National Stock Exchange. So that is definitely the agenda we take home. I would start where you ended on advocacy, because we find that the statutory audit or the auditors who report on the financial statements, they have a regulatory status because companies which are listed, companies which are in the financial services require mandatory audit, where such regulatory mandate is not there for internal audits in many countries. So how does IIA advocate and how successful have they been? I believe in the US also, all listed companies do not mandatorily require internal audit function within themselves.
Okay, well, let me just say to your last point first. The New York Stock Exchange does require its listed companies to have an internal audit function. NASDAQ does not. I have spoken out and said that as an investor, I would be very skeptical about investing in any company that doesn't have an internal audit function, because I think it speaks to the value that that the board holds for a strong and effective oversight. If the board doesn't require management to design or to maintain an internal audit function, it says something to me about management's emphasis on risk management and controls. And so as an investor, I'd be very skeptical about making that investment. All of that said, you're right that in some countries around the world, there is a stronger emphasis on mandating internal audit than in others. My personal feeling, and then I'll talk a little bit about where the IA is getting ready to go with this. My personal feeling is that licensing and regulation can be very alluring because it can make it appear as though, yes, now we're seen as so important and so valuable that they're mandating that we be in place. I'd prefer to earn that seat, frankly, by the value that I deliver in my organization, rather than to have a regulator or the government prescribe it. We don't perform a service directly for the public. Our service is performed for our stakeholders within the company or within the organization. Our reports aren't public. And so while I do believe that shareholders and investors are tertiary stakeholders, they are not primary stakeholders for internal audit. And I would just be reluctant to see regulators and government start to mandate and prescribe how internal audit is conducted, what kind of credentials you need to have be able to practice it, because unlike these other professions that are licensed and regulated, we don't serve the public on a day-to-day basis. I also believe that personally, I believe that government which governs least often governs best, and so I just tend to be one who doesn't personally feel comfortable seeing government reach in and say, this is how you have to practice this particular profession. All of those things said, the IIA recognizes that some of our institutes, some of our affiliates around the world believe that within their countries the circumstances are somewhat different, and so they would like to see a greater emphasis on legislation or regulation. So this is something the IIA is preparing to study, and I always keep an open mind on these things personally. This is not my decision at the end of the day. It will be the board of directors of the IIA. And so if at the conclusion of this study, this licensing task force that we're in the process of forming, if at the end of the day that task force recommends a change in the IIA's position and our board of directors embraces that, then the IIA's position may very well change. Up to this point, we haven't seen a lot of value in having government regulation or licensing of internal audit, but we're going to keep an open mind as we go through this process.
So India is one of the countries which has, on the regulatory front, conducted itself differently. So here, not only listed companies, but large public companies and even some private companies require mandatory internal audit. Companies which are closely held, all that they need to do is meet the criteria of having a certain turnover threshold and certain threshold of having external borrowings. Do you think so? We are really now looking at mandatory internal audit for even medium-sized companies in the private sector.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think a regulation like this creates awareness, or it is likely to marginalize internal audit and trivialize it?
Well, I don't know that it marginalizes or trivializes it. I don't know that having a mandatory statute or regulation makes any profession more valuable. I think it just simply makes it more required. I would say that if at the end of the day that is a statutory initiative that the legislators in India want to impose and the regulators want to impose, that's certainly the prerogative here. I wouldn't by any means presume to suggest that it's inappropriate. One of my concerns has been that once you get a lot of regulation and a lot of legislation involving a profession, that you gradually see government encroach more and more in setting the standards for how that profession is practiced. And that does tend to have, I think, over time, you run the risk that it diminishes the ability of the profession to add value because it is so constrained. I was using an analogy last night. I get asked often to contrast the difference between the statutory or the external auditors and the internal auditors. And I used an analogy last night that I hadn't used before, but I actually think it could have some relevance. And I think that statutory auditors are there's so much prescribed, there's so much of their methodology is prescribed by regulators and by standard setters and others that I feel like a lot of times they're like the trains. They have to follow the tracks to get from one point to another. I think internal audit is more like a sailboat. That is, we have the ability to follow the winds and go wherever the destination needs to be based on where the risks and the winds of risks are. Now, that's not to say one is more valuable than the other, but it does say that if you suddenly take the internal audit function and you put it on a track, it's like taking a sailboat and putting it on the track. It's not going to follow the winds of risk.
Thank you for the analogy, because I definitely, as an internal auditor, find it more exciting to be compared to a sailboat than a train. So, one of the things that you have referred to in your book and in some of your blogs is for internal audit to earn a seat, not have a mandatory seat, but earn a seat on the table. What we find in India is that the banking sector is one sector which requires mandatorily to have in-house internal audit, as in the internal audit function cannot be outsourced. In those kinds of situations, or companies which have opted to have an in-house internal audit, the chief audit executive has found the seat on the table because he's considered an insider. But many large companies in India completely outsource their internal audit function. And I think that is where gaining a seat is becoming difficult. Also because the company which is outsourcing the internal audit looks at industry experience. So invariably, the same firm of internal audit is doing internal audit for various competitors. So that also becomes one of the hesitations for these companies to give you a seat on the table.
Right.
So how does one negotiate this? Because it's a chicken and egg situation that if you know my industry, what are the other companies you audited? So you have audited this, that is how you get the position of internal audit. Once you get it, they say that we cannot give you information which is strategic and sensitive and definitely not allow you to sit. And this becomes a big constraint for us.
Right. Well, let me say at the outset that I think that a decision to either fully outsource or to co-source internal audit has to be one that's made by every company, and every audit committee needs to be fully engaged in that discussion. The IA believes that the most effective model is one where the internal audit function is managed from within the company. Now, that doesn't mean that all the staff are a part of the company or are employed by the company, but we also recognize there are many instances where a full outsource model does make sense, particularly on a short-term basis. If a company is trying to transform its internal audit function, it's often difficult to do that incrementally or marginally, and sometimes you just have to bring in an outsourced provider. I would also say that I have seen a number of full outsourced providers in the United States where the head of the engagement team has gained every much a seat at the table as any in-house chief audit executive in the U.S. Because often, my experience has been if it's a big outsource engagement, the firm will put some of their most talented partners on it, and these partners didn't get to where they are by not being capable of winning and winning the confidence and trust of management. I get your point that if internal audit is in fact seen as having too much being spread across the industry with competitors, that could create some concerns. But I would think that if there's a full outsource engagement of the right magnitude, that a firm would probably say, well, we don't want to get caught in a situation where we're seen as managing the same function for competitors. I guess what I would say is I think there is a path to winning that seat at the table. It's this concept of the trusted advisor that I often speak about. And I think what one would need to do is assess what is it what is the philosophy of the audit committee and senior management in this company? What are they looking for from internal audit, and how can I best deliver it? And if I have a potential conflict because I have relationships with competitive industries, then I need to work on those. So it's no different in many cases than the external audit firms have, because some of them have industries that they're real expertise in, whether it's the utilities industry or financial services, and there they have maybe the external audit relationship with competitor companies or firms. But I do think that there is an extra hurdle to overcome if you want to win the seat at the table and be in the room with executive management as they're talking about business strategies and risks.
So, no, so I understand that for a completely outsourced function, that route to getting that seat on the management could be a little longer and would require a little more trust to be achieved than for an insider. Interestingly, I understand, my knowledge could be limited, that the big four, big eight accounting firms, it started with the big eight and now people talk of big
Now
four
what
and
we
maybe
call
five.
the final four.
The final four. So, in India, all the big four accounting firms have a large internal audit practice where they take up internal audits on complete outsourced basis.
Right.
Now, that is not a model one has possibly seen in the US, or is it any different?
Well, you do. Each of the firms in the U.S. would have an internal audit practice, and I think probably each of them has some full outsourced clients. I know at least two of them do, and I think all of them do. And so it's not unheard of there.
No, maybe I think one of the reasons why one sees it more here is with the private equity funding coming in, one of the requirements for them to have the statutory audit earlier and now also the internal audit to be done by an auditor that they are familiar with. So it could be one of those reasons here.
Now we do have, and I'm not quite familiar with whether there are provisions in the Companies Act or any of the other regulations that have come out on this. But in the U.S., internal audit services are a prohibited service for the external auditor. So the statutory auditor cannot provide any internal audit service for the company if they are the external auditor.
We do have similar
Yes.
regulations that for the same company, you cannot be the statutory
Right.
auditors and the internal auditors.
Right.
But that brings me to a little more current issue that we have seen. So the similar to the Sarbanes-Oxley requirement of reporting on internal financial controls, so we had a recent regulation where statutory auditors are required to report on the adequacy and effectiveness of internal controls over financial reporting.
Right.
Now, in many companies, because the time to make the transition was rather short, so many companies, the associates of the statutory auditors have helped the companies develop the risk management framework, and then the statutory auditors have given their opinion. Do you see any apparent conflict in that?
Well, I don't know enough about the details to know what controls they would have in place. I don't know if the regulations or the statutes are silent on that. Obviously, and it was true in the U.S. as well, I'm sure, that in many cases, pre-Sarbanes-Oxley, it was acceptable. You did have the opportunity to provide both internal audit and external audit services to the same companies. Sarbanes-Oxley prescribed that you couldn't do that anymore. So prior to that, you had companies where or instances where the external auditors might have helped design or implement controls that later, when they were just the statutory auditor, one could have argued that there was a conflict of interest. It didn't seem to be a big problem. I don't recall a lot of outcry about it at the time. I think what you would hope is that if there is a conflict, that the external audit firm would disclose that in their reports, their annual report, if they are opining on anything that they help to design prior to the implementation of these restrictions. But I don't know enough about all the nuances of the regulations here to comment.
All right. So when we look at the Indian scenario, so you talked about the administrative reporting and the functional reporting. So question may be a little off the thing that who decides the budget? Where you functionally report or you administratively report? Because we find that there is a big expectations gap, because my functional reporting line decides the extent of the audit, but my administrative reporting line decides on my budget. And that does cause a clear mismatch between the expectations
Right.
and the affordability.
Well, and that's why I think there has to be, first of all, I don't think it should be an either or. I think there needs to be a collaboration there in the process of deciding on internal audit's budget. If internal audit's budget is determined by the administrative reporting line without any input or consultation from the audit committee, my advice to the chief audit executive is to go into the audit committee and present not only the audits that are in your budget, but the ones that you can't do because you don't have the budget. In fact, I often say that the most probing question that an audit committee can answer or can ask internal audit is, what are the top 5 risks that are not in your audit plan because you don't have the resources? Because if the chief audit executive is answering that truthfully, the audit committee members will have to then do a little bit of soul searching and say, are we okay that these things are not going to be looked at? And it also puts them in that decision process de facto. Because if there are some key risks that internal audit identified as part of their audit plan, planning process, or their risk assessment process, they're not resourced because management or some other imposed requirement says these are all the staff you're going to have this year based on the budget you have, and you have some audits that you cannot get to, then I think the audit committee needs to know what those are, because that's a risk that they have to be willing to accept, that these are areas that are not going to be covered.
Oh, that's excellent. So I understand that what we need to do is to at least present to the audit committee that if there was a larger budget, these are the next set of risks which we would audit, and it would possibly get them thinking.
Well, and but you do it in a more, and now is when I want all the CEOs that are watching to cover their ears. You do it in a way that doesn't put the audit committee and put you on the spot. It should be much more subtly handled.
Absolutely.
It should be, here's our audit plan, and here are the audits that we're not going to be able to include on the plan because of resources, and then say, do you have guidance for us, this is to the audit committee, on how you would want us to prioritize any of these audits? So it really forces the audit committee to confront any resource limitations that internal audit faces, and it forces the audit committee to either concur that the resources that have been allocated are appropriate and the risks that are going to be addressed are appropriate. The audit committee, they're not potted plants. They have to be a part of this discussion, and they have to be a part of the decision-making process that internal audit will allow internal audit to provide the right coverage, because they have an oversight responsibility of internal audit. It shouldn't just be that they sit there and take reports. They ought to have some opportunity for back and forth.
Great. So, coming back to the way the scope is decided. So increasingly we find that the budget constraints, or sometimes the way internal audit is driven, even in large corporation, the emphasis on value addition through consulting services is much larger than assurance, to the extent that in some companies, in some years, they completely eliminate the assurance activity. Would it still qualify as internal audit at all?
Well, again, I think, going back to the discussion that I led you through earlier, the thing we heard worldwide from internal audit's customers is that they want to see assurance first, and then the consulting. I think there's a very good case study of this. The case study was the Toshiba case in Japan, where they had a financial misstatement a couple of years ago, and the board commissioned an investigation to come in and look at how did this happen. And if you look at the investigators' report, they got into a criticism of internal audit because it was almost entirely focused on consulting, and that it was not doing the kind of assurance work that allowed management and the board to fully understand what areas of financial reporting were not being appropriately assessed. So again, I'm not going to get into all the nuances of the Toshiba study. They did a very good job. I commend the board at the time for taking the steps they did. But I think that's a good example of what happens when internal audit tilts too heavily in one direction or the other.
So interesting. I did read about the Toshiba, what you've written, and I think that prompted me to the question because very often the decision on the scope, the internal auditors do not really have the full freedom to decide. But I do take it that assurance activity must form an integral part of any good internal audit plan.
Yeah, one of the challenges that I think internal auditors face, and it depends again a little bit on the culture of the organization, but one of the challenges that they face is that often management wants internal audit to provide assurance, just not to the audit committee. Management's very comfortable hearing bad news. They just don't want the audit committee to hear the bad news. And that puts internal audit in an awkward situation because then what management will sometimes do is say, well, okay, if you have to tell the audit committee everything that comes out of an assurance engagement, then just treat this like it's consulting. And that puts internal audit in a difficult situation. And what I have often advised is that the audit committee needs to be involved in approving internal audit's charter, and there should be language in the charter of the internal audit department that prescribes how consulting engagements or advisory engagements are determined and how they're reported. The audit committee needs to sign away its rights, if you will, to know what all internal audit does. And a lot of audit committees aren't comfortable with that. A lot of audit committees say, no. If you find these conditions, we don't care if it's in an assurance engagement or advice or consulting or whatever you call it, if you find violation of a statutory requirement or violation of an environmental regulation or if you find that, even if it's in a consulting mode, we want to know about it on the audit committee. So my advice is to the chief audit executive, make sure that the audit committee has approved your mandate, your remit, as part of the charter as to how you handle consulting versus assurance.
Yes. So, yes, I remember reading because I did go through the IIA standards in detail at different points of time. So I think the words that they use is those charged with governance must be informed of any lapses, even if it doesn't squarely fall within your scope. So, you showed us several statistics of the membership and the skills, etc. Does a large majority of internal auditors come from the accounting background, or are they chartered accountants or CPAs, or that has changed significantly?
No, I think a majority, and I haven't seen fresh statistics in a while on it, but the majority of people in our profession still have an accounting background. I wouldn't say that it's a sizable majority that actually hold accounting credentials, but certainly large companies still look for credentialed accountants, but they're looking for the ones who are truly the elite, that have the ability to evolve beyond just being the accountants, and that have the ability to learn the business and to have the desire and the motivation to evolve and develop, so that perhaps in a lot of cases they eventually will move into the business out of internal audit. One of the trends we've seen over the last two decades is a tendency for high-profile companies in particular, large global companies and large cap companies in America and other countries, to recruit internal auditors into the internal audit department so that they get the exposure to the company, and then internal audit serves as a pipeline of talent into the company. And I think that is that's been good, and it's been healthy. I do believe that too much of a good thing, though, can be a bad thing, because if everyone in internal audit is just passing through, it's pretty hard for internal audit to develop institutional knowledge of risk and controls. If no one is going to be in the internal audit department 5 years from now, then anyone in the internal audit 5 years from now has probably never seen issues and risk and controls that they might see there. So we believe, I've advocated even back to my time at PwC in a blended model, where some positions in internal audit are career or permanent, some are rotational, and how that divides out depends on the company, obviously.
So considering that what we see in India is what we also see globally, that accountants are a vast majority of internal auditors. Do you see associations like Bombay Chartered Accountants Society and Institute of Internal Auditors coming together? Do you see such associations in other countries as well? Do you see such collaborations? And what would be your thoughts? What are the top 3, top 5 areas that we should work on through this association?
Well, I would tell you that we have, over the years, done things like this in different regions of the world. Good, healthy relationships between the internal audit professional associations and the external audits professional associations, I think is healthy. It's healthy for both professions. It's healthy for the corporate sector. And so I would, again, I applaud what's being done here. One thing that we did for our American members is that we developed a relationship with the AICPA, the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants, a number of years ago, where we hosted training together, financial fraud training, and training where there's an intersection of the financial auditor's interest in areas of responsibility and internal auditors' areas of responsibility. So I think that's one area where cooperation can lend great benefit to both organizations. I believe that when it comes to how the two can complement each other, there is a lot of internal auditors and the external auditors have a lot of common interests. They both have a keen interest in knowing what are the key risks of the organization, how are they being managed, particularly financial reporting. What is the culture like in the organization? Is it healthy? Does it promote transparency and full disclosure? So I think there are enough areas of common interest that good alignment is achievable.
From my perspective, what we will work through this association is to see if the 150,000th CIA certification or the 200,000th member is from India, so we can have the privilege of your company again.
Well, I'll come back here if that happens.
So with this, we would invite questions from the audience if anybody has a specific question.
Normally, I'm worried that the audience is going to ask tougher questions than the moderator, but I don't think that's possible tonight. So feel free to ask whatever. Ask away.
Yes.
In cloud computing, what kind of role do you see for internal auditors?
So what kind of role do we see for internal audit in cloud computing? And again, I think at the end of the day, it all comes back to where the risks are. I think that at a minimum, internal audit should be assessing how effective management's been in identifying its cloud computing risks. Does management know where their information resides on the cloud? What kind of controls have they designed? What do they know about the vendors where this information is being housed? How much access do they have in being able to audit their systems and their ability to contain and protect this information? We see this quite often, and I would tell you that even had a bit of a taste of this at the IA a couple of years ago, because a third-party vendor had access. We were using a third-party vendor to serve some of our members in the delivery of a particular service, and that vendor's systems were breached, and we were in a very difficult position because we had to communicate with our members about the extent of the breach, but the third party was suddenly not nearly as forthcoming and was kind of anxious about how much they disclosed to us timely, and we were caught between our customers, our members, and the third party. So I think the one thing I would say is that for any internal audit department in any company actually, but certainly in internal audit department is, know your third-party vendors and know what kind of controls they have in place and have access to the information when a breach occurs. Don't be at their mercy.
Any other questions?
You did remark about the frauds and scandals of reputed companies.
Yes.
What part can be associated to the failure of internal audit?
So the last part, what part can be associated
As a
failure of internal audit? So the question was, I have commented on several different companies out there, and then the question, the second part of the question was, to what extent can those failures be, or can these financial reporting frauds or these frauds be connected with the failure of internal audit? I think for me the scariest words in the English language is where was internal audit, because in my role, every time something happens really bad with any company, my first reaction is, well, what was internal audit doing in that company about it? Obviously, I had the misfortune, I guess, about a month after I came on as the CEO of IA Global, Satyam occurred, and I found myself on the phone with the Times of India and others here in the media trying to explain why internal audit and Satyam had been given a pat on the back by IA Global a few years before for getting a quality assurance review. So that's probably the kind of probably the kind of example you're talking about. Obviously, Satyam was a very complex case. I found it kind of interesting at the time that some in the external audit community here were pointing at Satyam as a good example of why internal audit needs to be outsourced. And I thought I recalled that the external auditors got in as much trouble as the internal auditor did there, but that's a story for another day. I think the point here is that, yes, internal audit has been culpable in some cases, but they've also been very courageous in some cases. The most notable one being WorldCom. Cynthia Cooper, the Chief Audit Executive of WorldCom, was a model of courage in helping to expose the fraud there, and was recognized even as a Time Person of the Year. It will probably be the only instance in our lifetime where an internal auditor is named a Person of the Year for Time Magazine. But there are probably many more cases where a lack of courage or fortitude didn't necessarily enable something or didn't cause it to happen, but could have prevented it if the internal auditors had been more diligent. There have been a few instances where internal audit has been implicated in the failure of an organization. Normally, it's by an act of omission, however, rather than an act of commission. Rarely do we see internal audit facilitating or being a part of any fraud. Too often, and I've written about this in my blog, where I talk about internal audit kind of in a sports analogy. I say, sometimes we can be conspirators and help something happen. More often, using the sports analogy, we're spectators. We sit in the stands while an infraction occurs, and we say nothing. Even less frequently, we're willing to throw a flag or issue a card after an infraction occurs. The best internal auditors are the ones that throw the flag or blow the whistle or hand out the card before the infraction occurs, because this is what really requires the courage. And so my advice to any internal auditor is, if you can't be courageous, and to any chief audit executive, if you can't be courageous in the face of adversity and fraud or corruption in a company or an organization, then get out of this profession and go do something, go drive a train.
So, yes, Mr. Shenoy.
I'm from L&T. It's a 17 billion company, turnover company. In your illustrious career, has there been any instance when certain scope was not included in your audit?
So, in my career, have there been instances where
Any area that was not scoped in the audit plan? Scope limitation.
right, scope limitations? No, I would say not in my career, because again, keep in mind that the bulk of my career was spent in the federal government of the United States, and there we had, we had extraordinary statutory independence. Not even the cabinet secretary can tell an IG that they can't look at something. That's the kind of statutory independence that I think all of us would dream of. But I've been fortunate never to have a situation where a scope limitation was imposed. Now, I do know that that happens, and I get that. I understand that a CEO may elect to say that I don't want internal audit looking at this. I do believe that at a minimum, that scope limitations should be fully disclosed. If there's a scope limitation in an audit, it needs to be disclosed as part of the audit for the protection of internal audit itself, as well as for the company. If there was a limitation, it isn't always suspicious. It's not always for wrong reasons. It may be that this is an area that's new to the company. It's emerging. Management doesn't really want it looked at yet, and internal audit just simply needs to disclose that. I think there's very little that can happen in the course of an internal audit that full disclosure won't remedy. Whether it's that we have a limitation ourselves, an objectivity impairment. If I have a relative working in the department that I did the audit work, I need to disclose that in the report. If I worked in the department until last year and now I'm back there doing an audit, I need to disclose that in the report and let the reader decide, or a third party decide, if I was biased in carrying out my role. Ideally, we avoid those kind of impairments by not getting caught in that situation. But if for some reason we're still asked to do it, then I think we just have to be willing to fully disclose it. And the same goes with any scope limitations.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I would request Preeti to come forward for the formal vote of thanks. But personal thanks to you. Because of you, Mr. Chambers, so many dignitaries, so many leaders of the internal audit profession are here today. My dear friend Naren Aneja has also perhaps come to the BCA office for the first time because of this. Not here. So, but I must say that even before the MOU, many of the people who are leaders of the IIA here have come as faculty for our training programs. As Bombay Chartered Accountants Society, we were the first ones to run a long duration internal audit course for training people in internal audit, and we have done it. I think we have completed 10 courses, 10 years in this. So with that, we go ahead with this, and thank you, Mrs. Chambers, for accompanying and being a part of this lovely evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Before I present the vote of thanks, I would please request our Vice President, Narayan Bhai, to give you a memento on our behalf to express our love and, thank you so much. Gratitude for coming here and talking to all of us.
We'll take another one after
I request Hetal, uh, sorry, to Nihal, sorry, to present a bouquet to Mr. Chetan Shah on behalf of IA. To Mr. Chetan Shah. Thank you.
May I request Himanshu Bhai to please present a memento to Mr. Sunil Gaitonde, the president of the Bombay chapter of IIA. Mr. Gaitonde has led this entire association right from the front because he's been part of every meeting that we had to bring these two institutes together. So we're really very grateful.
She deserves credit from our side.
We consider her to be our own.
Oh.
And may I request our president, Chetan Shah, to please give a memento to Namita Parekh for moderating this entire conversation and giving voice to the questions that we had.
That's very timely. That's real time audit. Thank you.
Yes. As part of the audit reports that we issue, we also put pictures because we believe that a picture can speak more than 1,000 words. So that's also something that we adopt when we present a report. So that's a memory for you. Thank you, Mr. Chambers. Thank you, Mr. Gaitonde. And our most valued invited guests and ladies and gentlemen, it's my privilege to propose a vote of thanks. I feel truly honored to be given this opportunity. I remember 10 years ago when I stepped into this profession, I heard these words, IIA. I heard the word COSO, as we call it. And today, after 10 years, I actually get to hear you. And I think that's so very true that when we sit down and read a book, uh, there are statistics that one reads. But when you have explained it so beautifully, I think as an internal auditor, I've taken back a lot of, you would have seen me sitting there and noting down furiously things that I think that I would want to adopt, whether it be looking at the auditing culture, whether it be hearing the voice of the customer, and also, the one point which I take back is I need to adjust my sailboats so that the winds, where they take me, looking and charting my course. Because very often when we do internal audit, I work with Nandita and we are co-sourced at the organizations. And when we draw up the internal audit charter, the scope for the year, and we find that no change is made during the year, that's a question that comes to our mind. And very often we voice it on the audit committees where we say that, these are the changes that have come in, but our scope hasn't changed. So we have, of course, given the audit committees a lot of most of them would look awkwardly at the management, but that's a question that is up in the air for them to answer. So thank you so much. I would also like to thank Mr. Sunil Gaitonde and the entire team. Nehal, we don't have Akhilesh with us.
Senior Vice President, Mr. Burzen.
Burzen has also been. So we've had these meetings since September last, where we sat together and we came up with this idea that let's get together because at Bombay Chartered Accountants Society, we are also looking at how do we bring more learning to our members. So I think with this association, we would be seeing that transformation both at BCS and at the IIA Bombay chapter. Thank you so much. Thank you, Chetan Bhai. He has been also part of the last round of discussions that we had. Himanshu Bhai, who is the chairman of the Accounting and Auditing Committee, has sat on the meetings and said, do the way you'll want to. Don't have a clean slate and draw whatever you want to. So thank you so much for that. The managing committee of the BCS, and especially I'm missing Mukesh Bhai Trivedi. He was not able to be there. I would also want to, of course, thank Nandita Parekh. She has been a friend, philosopher, guide to me. And when we said that we are having Mr. Chambers here, we said that we would want her to come and ask you the questions so that she would voice those questions that we all have, but we didn't know whom to ask. So thank you so much for that. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, members of the IIA Bombay chapter, for coming here. And last but not the least, thank you, the BCS family members. We at BCS believe that we are part of one family. So thank you so much. Thank you to all the staff for making these arrangements, and wish you all a very good evening. Thank you.
एक मिनट एक मिनट शिवाली शिवाली Thank you.